Usually when we talk about a garden, there is this expectation of like peace.
Right, yeah. Sanctuary.
Yeah, a sanctuary. You pick your planting the seeds, you water the soil, and the gardener just sort of watches the green shoots come up.
It is very quiet.
Quiet, restorative, it feels clean, and comforting. We like growth to be gentle, to be natural, to happen in the sunshine with a soft breeze.
Of course, that is the modern ideal.
But then you step into the agricultural world of the ancient Near East,
Yeah.
specifically as it is used to describe human suffering, and suddenly that peaceful garden is just gone.
Oh, completely gone.
We are looking at a landscape of cultivation that is, well, honestly, it is violent. It is the absolute definition of harsh, unrelenting husbandry.
Yeah, that idyllic picture of a modern backyard garden, it does not map onto the ancient world at all. I mean, when you look at the agricultural metaphors used in antiquity, you are looking at sweat, heavy iron, stubborn animals.
Just tearing up the earth by force.
Exactly. I mean, precisely that. It is a violent disruption of the soil.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the source material surrounding Psalm 129.
A really intense text.
It really is. And for this deep dive, we are pulling heavily from Charles Spurgeon's The Treasury of David, alongside some brilliant commentaries from John Calvin, Alexander Henderson, David Dixon, and Robert Nisbet.
Some of the sharpest minds on this subject.
For sure. To set the scene for you as you listen, Psalm 129 is what is known as a song of degrees, or a song of ascents.
Right, the pilgrim songs.
Yeah, these were the songs sung by pilgrims on the literal road going up to the temple in Jerusalem. And what stands out immediately to me is just the rustic nature of the song.
It is very earthy.
Earthy is a great word for it. It overflows with agricultural imagery. It feels very reminiscent of the books of Ruth or Amos.
Well, the tone of the singer here is critical to grasp before we even look at the text itself. The person singing this is not a new convert who expects a life of ease.
Right, not a rookie.
No, this is the mature, tested voice of an older believer, someone looking back on an entire lifetime of affliction.
They have the scars to prove their faith.
Yeah. And the song starts so abruptly, almost as if the singer has been brooding in silence for hours, turning over the history of God's people in their mind, and suddenly the thoughts just ignite and they have to speak.
It just bursts out. The text begins with verse 1. Many a time have they afflicted me from my youth, may Israel now say.
It is quite the opening.
It is. I'm really struck by the phrasing there. The psalmist refers to the enemies simply as they. It is such a vague pronoun.
Very vague.
Because if I were writing a song about my enemies, I would probably name them. I would want everyone to know, who did this to me.
Give them a specific call out.
Right. But leaving it as they feels heavier somehow.
Yeah.
It feels like the opposition is just a constant, inescapable reality.
That pronoun they carries immense weight. By refusing to name a specific king or a specific rival nation, it denotes a nameless, innumerable mass of enemies.
Which is terrifying, honestly.
John Calvin provides a really brilliant analysis of this. He notes that the world is filled with foes, both external and internal, who are armed by Satan to destroy good men.
So it's not just one guy causing trouble.
Right. If the psalmist had just said the Assyrians or the Egyptians, it would lock the scope of the song to a single historical event. But they captures the reality that the opposition is constant. It comes from all sides.
It is a collective, relentless force. It makes the opposition feel like a feature of the system rather than a bug. Like, if you are following God, the world will instinctively push back.
That is the baseline expectation.
And then there is that phrase, from my youth. When the psalmist says this on behalf of Israel, we are looking at a history of trial that began incredibly early.
Very early. Think about their origins.
Yeah, if you trace the timeline, their youth was spent as slaves in Egypt. That was their national cradle. 400 years of making bricks without straw.
Facing the infanticide of their male children under Pharaoh.
Just horrific stuff from day one.
The affliction was baked into their genesis as a people. And then after Egypt, their toddler years, so to speak, were spent wandering in a hostile wilderness.
Facing attacks from the Amalekites.
Right, who picked off the weak and the stragglers at the back of the line. And even when they reached maturity and entered Canaan, they were surrounded by hostile nations.
Philistines, Moabites, you name it.
So to say, from my youth, signifies that persecution is the standard, expected state of the church. Babes in grace are cradled in opposition. As soon as the man-child is born, the dragon is waiting to devour it.
That is a staggering reality for you to carry as a listener. The idea that opposition is not a sign that something has gone wrong, but rather the standard operating procedure.
It is a huge paradigm shift.
But this brings up a massive theological tension, because we are talking about a sovereign God who possesses the ability to stop the opposition at any second.
He could end it with a word.
So why does he permit this? Why does he deny his people a peaceful earthly existence and instead ordain this relentless affliction?
It is the classic question of suffering. Robert Nisbet tackles this precise tension, and he lays out 3 distinct reasons why a sovereign God brings affliction upon his people.
Okay, let's unpack those.
The first reason he gives is safety.
I have to say, safety sounds entirely counterintuitive.
I know it does.
Because when I think of safety, I think of a fortress, a solid bank account, a healthy body, peace on my borders. How on earth does affliction provide safety?
Well, it provides safety from our own wandering hearts. Human nature is such that when we are completely comfortable, we drift. Religion without sorrow pines away.
We fall asleep at the wheel.
Think about King David. When was David in the greatest spiritual danger?
Oh, that is a good point.
It was not when he was running for his life in the wilderness, hiding in caves from Saul, writing those desperate psalms.
Yeah.
He was perfectly safe spiritually in the cave because he was clinging to God.
He had to. He had nothing else.
Right. The moment David was in the most catastrophic danger was when he was completely at ease, walking on the roof of his palace while his army was off at war.
And that comfort led to his greatest moral failure with Bathsheba.
Yes. Affliction shatters the proud illusion that we can dispense with God. It keeps the believer clinging to the source of their salvation. When everything is going well, you easily rely on your own strength.
But when you are crushed under the weight of trial, you realize you are just dust. The furnace keeps you awake. It forces you to stay vigilant.
Exactly, which connects perfectly to Nisbet's second point, self-knowledge.
I think we all recognize that the times you learn the most about your own character are never the days you get a promotion or win an award.
Never.
It is always the day everything falls apart.
Yeah.
You see what you are made of, and often it is not pretty.
It is only in the furnace that we truly know our own sin and recognize our absolute need for a savior. When life is easy, we might intellectually agree with the doctrine that we need grace, but we do not feel it in our moans. We think we are patient until we are stuck in traffic or dealing with a rebellious child.
Oh, absolutely. Or we think we are brave until our health fails.
Right. Affliction burns away our self-righteousness. It shows us our own fragility, our impatience, our selfishness, and our capacity for failure.
And that realization forces us to look outside ourselves for rescue. The trial is a mirror, and the reflection is meant to drive us to Christ.
Which brings us to Nisbet's third point, world knowledge.
Okay, world knowledge.
Affliction exposes the emptiness of the world. It pulls back the curtain on everything society tells us is valuable.
So status, wealth, all of that.
Consider what the world offers as security. Riches, pleasures, social status, a vast network of influential friends. When a severe trial hits, you suddenly realize the absolute limitations of those things.
Yeah, your bank account cannot cure a terminal illness.
No, it cannot.
And your social status cannot offer peace of mind when you are facing eternity or, dealing with the loss of a child.
Affliction teaches us that the things the world values cannot save us at the bar of God. As Job found out when he lost everything, earthly comforts are miserable comforters in the face of genuine tragedy.
So it teaches us to hold the things of this world very loosely.
Very loosely.
Okay, so we establish that this suffering is ancient, it is frequent, and it is ordained for our safety, our self-knowledge, and our understanding of the world's emptiness. But the psalm does not leave us wallowing in the misery of that reality.
No, the tone shifts dramatically.
Verse 2 features this massive triumphant pivot. The psalmist repeats the first line, "Many a time have they afflicted me from my youth," but then adds this incredible statement, "Yet they have not prevailed against me."
Charles Spurgeon notes the weight of this. The enemies had every opportunity. They had the upper hand time and time again.
The military might, the political leverage, the societal numbers.
But they never once gained the ultimate victory.
Never. To grasp the theological logic of that survival, we have to look back at Genesis chapter 32, don't we?
Yes, the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel of the covenant at the river Jabbok. During that intense, agonizing physical struggle in the dark, Jacob refused to let go until he received a blessing. The text tells us that Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, prevailed with God.
He walked away from that encounter with a limp.
Signifying his own brokenness, yes, but he had the blessing.
The deduction there is incredible, because
Yeah.
if Israel wrestled with God and prevailed, then what can Esau do? What can a hostile army do?
That is the core conclusion. If you have the blessing of the Almighty, the opposition of the world is rendered futile. No man or devil can vanquish the one who has prevailed with God.
The historical survival of the Christian faith is the perfect, tangible proof of this reality. Just look at the early church under the Roman Empire.
A perfect example.
You had a small, marginalized group of people. They had no secular authority. They held no political offices. They had no vast treasury to fund armies, and they certainly lacked the elite philosophical pedigree of the Roman academies.
They were fishermen, slaves, tradesmen, ordinary people.
Right. And the state machinery of the Roman Empire, the most formidable empire the world had ever seen, was explicitly mobilized to crush them.
Because the state viewed them as a threat to the societal order.
Right, they wouldn't worship the emperor.
Exactly. So the emperors, figures like Nero, Decius, Diocletian, they utilized every terrifying instrument of state terror available.
It was horrifying.
Subterranean dungeons, the rack, gibbets. They literally threw Christians to starving wild beasts in the amphitheater for public entertainment.
And Nero turning believers into human torches to light his gardens.
Yes.
And yet, what was the result? The faith spread like wildfire. The teeth of wild beasts could not grind it down. The fire could not burn it. The water could not drown it.
The more the Roman state tried to stamp it out, the faster it multiplied across the empire.
So what does this mean for you, the listener, who is sitting in your car or your living room right now, feeling completely overrun by your current circumstances?
It is easy to feel disconnected from ancient history.
Right. You might be listening to this thinking, okay, the Roman Empire might have failed, but my enemies, my financial collapse, my health crisis, they feel like they're prevailing right now.
It requires a massive shift in how we define what it means to prevail.
Yeah.
The world defines prevailing as an absence of pain, a victory parade, or a life of uninterrupted comfort. But the biblical definition of prevailing is survival through the storm.
I like to picture it like a coastal lighthouse built on a rocky, jagged cliff.
Oh, that is a great image.
Imagine standing inside that structure during a massive hurricane. The waves are 50 feet high, crashing violently against the glass. The wind is howling like a freight train. The entire stone structure is vibrating.
It would be terrifying.
If you were standing inside that lighthouse, feeling the walls shake, it feels like the storm is winning. It feels like destruction is inevitable.
Yeah.
But when the morning breaks and the clouds part, the lighthouse is still standing. It is not standing because the glass is indestructible or because the storm lacked fury. It is standing because of the bedrock it is anchored into. The storm had of opportunity. It unleashed everything it had, but it did not prevail.
That visual captures the essence of verse 2 perfectly. The survival of the believer is not based on their own structural integrity. It is based entirely on the foundation of Christ.
The foundation holds.
The enemy is permitted to rage. The winds are allowed to howl. But the enemy does not get the final word.
So moving into verse 3, the imagery shifts from a battle or a storm to something much more visceral and intimate.
Very physical.
The text says, "The plowers plowed upon my back. They made long their furrows." We're looking at a vivid, gruesome image of scourging, where the back of the nation is torn up like a field.
It is a shocking transition from the corporate survival of Israel to this intensely physical description of pain.
Now, some modern critics read that verse and claim it's a mixed metaphor, right?
Huh.
Arguing that comparing a human back to a dirt field is clunky poetry.
They do, yes. But that critique completely misses the historical context of the ancient Near East.
Right, because if you understand ancient farming practices and ancient penal systems, this imagery overlaps with terrifying precision.
Let us examine the agricultural side first. When farmers in the East plowed a field, the iron blade of the plow did not dig as deep into the earth as massive, modern mechanical plows do today.
Right, they didn't have diesel tractors.
No, the furrows were relatively superficial, but they were exceptionally long. The farmer would drive the oxen and score the earth from one end of the field straight to the other in a continuous, unbroken line.
Which instantly makes me picture the Roman scourging. The lictors using those terrible whips.
The overlap is undeniable. The Roman instrument of torture was the flagellum. It was a whip with multiple leather thongs, and woven into the ends of those thongs were pieces of bone, lead balls, or sharp metal.
Just designed to do maximum tissue damage.
When a prisoner was stripped and tied to a post, the lictor would strike the back, and the metal would dig into the skin and muscle. As the whip was pulled away, it tore the flesh in long, bleeding wails.
And the resulting wounds looked precisely like the long, straight ridges of a plowed dirt field.
Exactly.
You cannot read that description without it pointing explicitly to the passion of Jesus Christ. During his trial, he was handed over to the Roman soldiers who stripped him and executed a brutal scourging.
Spurgeon comments heavily on this.
He does, noting that Christ's back was literally torn open to resemble a plowed field. He experienced the ultimate physical fulfillment of this psalm in his own body as the substitute for his people.
Christ endured the deepest, most agonizing furrows. But the text is also applying this reality to the church, to the collective people of God throughout history.
We are the field being plowed.
Yes. And this brings us to Alexander Henderson, the Scottish theologian, who offers what is arguably the theological core of our discussion today. He introduces the masterful husbandman analogy.
I love this analogy. It completely reframes how we view suffering and the people causing it.
It changes everything. Henderson points out that God is the great husbandman. He is the sovereign farmer who owns the field, and he is the one who owns the plow.
But we must maintain a critical distinction here, right? God owns the field and the equipment, but he is not the one holding the whip or driven by malicious intent.
Right. Satan and wicked men operate as the plowmen and the oxen in this scenario.
So the oppressors, the tyrants, the people causing the affliction, they are just farm animals in this theological framework.
Conceptually, yes, they are the oxen. The oxen are driven forward by the goads of worldly provocations. Their own hatred, their malice, their desire for power or revenge pushes them forward to tear up the field.
But here is the magnificent, comforting truth of Reformed theology regarding providence.
They cannot yoke themselves.
Exactly. Those oxen cannot yoke themselves to that plow without God's explicit license. They need permission to even enter the field.
It reminds me of the opening chapters of Job.
Yes. Where Satan has to stand before the throne and ask for permission to strike Job, and God sets very specific boundaries on what Satan is allowed to do.
That is the exact parallel. The oxen need permission to enter the field. And once they are permitted in, they cannot cut 1 single inch deeper than the husbandman allows.
No.
God tempers the iron of the plow. The oxen might desire to turn the entire field upside down, to destroy the soil completely so nothing ever grows again, but God restricts their movement. He holds the reins.
This is a massive paradigm shift for anyone listening. The person or the circumstance causing you intense pain right now is not acting outside of God's jurisdiction.
No, they are not.
They might be acting out of pure malice, driven by their own evil intentions, but God is superintending the entire process. He is sovereign over the furrow.
Which naturally leads to the question of purpose. What is the goal of taking a sharp iron blade to a dirt field?
Well, the farmer does it to break up the dirt, to aerate the soil.
The goal is to break up the stiff, fallow ground. The human heart naturally becomes hard, compacted, and resistant to grace.
Just from daily living.
Yes. If the soil remains hard, the seed of the word simply bounces off the surface and is carried away by the wind or eaten by birds. The enemies intend to destroy the believer. Their goal is annihilation.
But the great husbandman uses their wicked intentions to prepare the soil.
The blade cuts open the hard heart, creating a space where the seed can drop in, find moisture, and take root.
The enemies are doing God's husbandry without even realizing they're being used.
They have no idea.
That is a staggering thought. The devil thinks he's destroying the field, but he is actually just aerating the soil so that God can plant something beautiful. The sheer malice of the enemy is hijacked by the sovereignty of God to produce spiritual fruit.
The oppressor is outwitted by the very action they think is bringing them victory.
And that leads us to the precise moment when the plowing stops. Look at verse 4. The Lord is righteous. He hath cut us under the cords of the wicked.
Because the plowing has to stop eventually.
Right. If the field is getting torn up to this degree, how does the farmer decide when enough is enough? There has to be a stopping point, or there's no field left to plant. And when the text says, he cuts the cords, what is the mechanical reality of that action?
This relies on the literal mechanics of the agricultural metaphor. The cords are the thick, heavy, twisted ropes that tie the oxen to the yoke, which in turn is attached to the plow itself.
So the harness.
Yes. The oxen represent the enemies, and the plow represents the instrument of affliction. The farmer holds the knife as well as the reins.
So God steps into the field when the soil is sufficiently prepared.
He steps into the field and notice the verb. He does not gently untie the knots.
No.
The text says he cuts them asunder. The action is violent, sudden, and irreversible. By cutting the cords, he completely ruins the machinery of the oppressors.
The oxen can continue to rage.
They can pull forward with all their might, but the plow stops moving. The connection between the oppressor's anger and the believer's affliction is severed.
You see that sudden severance throughout biblical history. The Red Sea crashing down on Pharaoh's army, the angel of the Lord striking down the Assyrian camp in a single night.
The oppressor is moving forward with full momentum, and suddenly the cord is cut.
But the phrasing there, "the Lord is righteous," is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It answers the cry for justice.
It does. God bears with the long furrows for a season because he is utilizing them to prepare the soil. But his nature as a righteous judge demands that he stop the plowing eventually.
He hates those who hurt his people.
Intensely. Even though he utilizes their hatred for a temporary season to achieve his own sovereign ends, he holds them accountable for their malice. The scripture in Zechariah states, "He that toucheth you toucheth the apple of his eye."
To poke the pupil of God's eye is an action that invites swift, devastating judgment.
It is a terrifying realization for the wicked. They are being used as a tool of affliction, and once the work is done, the tool will be discarded and judged for the damage it desired to cause.
Which brings us to verse 5. Wait, I have a massive problem with this next part. Verse 5 says, "Let them all be confounded and turned back that hate Zion." This is an imprecatory prayer.
The tricky imprecatory psalms.
Yeah, praying for people to be confounded and turned back sounds incredibly vindictive to modern ears. We are taught to love our enemies, to pray for those who persecute us, to turn the other cheek. How does a believer praying for the downfall of their enemies square with the command to love?
It is a vital tension to address, and theologians have wrestled with the imprecatory psalms for centuries. But we have to look at the text with absolute precision. Notice the psalmist does not say, "all who hate me." The prayer says, "all who hate Zion."
So the distinction is between a personal vendetta and a corporate defense.
Spot on. Theologians like Wolfgang Musculus and Thomas LeBlanc point out that this prayer is not driven by personal revenge. If someone steals your coat, you give them your shirt. If they insult you, you bear it.
But this is driven by a zeal for the people of God.
The preservation of the church and the cause of divine truth.
It is the difference between someone insulting my shoes on the street, which I can just ignore, and someone trying to burn down my house with my family sleeping inside. I have a moral obligation to stop the arsonist.
That analogy captures the moral necessity of the prayer perfectly. And furthermore, LeBlanc introduces the concept of good confusion.
Good confusion.
Yes. When the psalmist prays for the enemies of Zion to be confounded, it does not mandate their immediate physical destruction. It can be a confounding that leads to repentance.
I instantly think of the Apostle Paul.
Saul of Tarsus is the ultimate historical example of this. He was on the road to Damascus carrying letters of authority to arrest Christians. He was breathing out murderous threats against the church.
He was the most dangerous enemy of Zion breathing at that moment.
And God answered the prayer of Psalm 129. He struck Saul with a blinding light, threw him into the dirt, and completely confounded his plans. He was turned back from his evil way.
And that confusion, that shattering of his pride and his agenda led to his conversion.
Yes. So praying for an enemy's plans to be frustrated, praying for their wicked agenda to fail spectacularly, can actually be the most loving thing you can do for their soul.
You are praying for the mechanism of their pride to be broken so they can see their need for grace.
However, we cannot ignore the alternative. If they refuse to repent, there is a desire for strict justice present in the text. We can understand this through the framework of treason.
Treason against a king.
Loyal subjects of a king naturally wish ill to the plots of traitors attempting to overthrow the kingdom.
Like the old British anthem, confound their politics, frustrate their knavish tricks, you are praying for the safety of the realm.
It is a righteous desire to see wicked policies fail. You cannot love what is good without simultaneously hating what is evil. If you love sheep, you must hate the wolves.
That makes total sense.
Charles Spurgeon made an insightful point about this. He said, if you read the Book of Martyrs and study the horrific, calculated tortures inflicted on innocent believers throughout history, you will feel the rightness of justice against cruel oppressors.
When you read the historical accounts of the English Reformation, figures like Queen Mary, known as Bloody Mary, or Bishop Bonner, you read the accounts of men and women being tied to wood and set on fire simply for reading the Bible in English or refusing to recant their theology.
It is chilling.
When you read the sheer cruelty of those acts, a sense of righteous anger is the only appropriate moral response.
If you do not desire to see that kind of cruelty stopped, judged, and punished, It indicates a severe lack of love for the victims. Desiring justice against tyrants is not a character flaw in the believer.
It is a reflection of the holy character of God. God is just, and he will not allow wickedness to triumph forever.
Which transitions us into the final section of the psalm, verses 6 through 8, where the psalmist describes the ultimate fate of these oppressors.
We get another agricultural metaphor here, but it is very different from the plowing. The wicked are compared to grass upon the housetops, which withereth afore it groweth up.
Roof grass.
I'm picturing modern suburban houses with slanted roofs and asphalt shingles. Grass obviously wouldn't grow there. How did ancient roofs even support plant life?
The architecture of the ancient Near East, especially the houses of the poor and rustic country dwellings, was entirely different. They did not have peaked roofs to shed snow or rain.
Right, less rainfall.
They had flat roofs, which functioned as an additional living space. The surface of these roofs was constructed by laying down beams, covering them with brush, and then applying a thick mixture of mud, ashes, and straw.
So they would pack it down?
Yes, they would use a heavy stone roller to pack this mud mixture down hard and flat.
So the roof is essentially a packed dirt floor elevated above the house.
Right. Now, because seeds naturally blow around in the wind, they easily land on these dirt roofs. And because the roof is elevated and entirely exposed to the intense heat of the sun, those seeds germinate and sprout incredibly quickly.
But the biological catch is that there is no depth of soil.
There is no depth, and there is no retained moisture. The mud is packed hard and shallow, so the grass shoots up rapidly, creating this flashy, vibrant green show across the roof.
But it possesses no root system to sustain it.
Before it can even reach maturity, the very same sun that caused it to sprout rapidly scorches it, and it dies.
It dies before it can be harvested or utilized for anything. It is just a temporary flash of green. How does this biological reality apply to the enemies of the church?
The prosperity of the wicked is flashy, fast, and entirely rootless. It generates a massive noise and a visual spectacle, but it vanishes quickly.
The old proverb is soon ripe, soon rotten.
The wicked make incredible speed to success. They amass wealth, they gather armies, they build monuments to themselves, but they make equal speed to their own ruin.
That makes me think of Emperor Julian the Apostate. He is the quintessential example of roof grass in ancient history.
Julian's narrative fits this metaphor perfectly. Julian was a Roman emperor who, after ascending to the throne, completely rejected his Christian upbringing and tried to revive paganism across the empire.
And he had all the resources to do it.
He possessed the vast wealth of Rome, the legions, the intellectual academies. He wrote treatises against the Galileans, as he called Christians.
He even attempted to rebuild the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, specifically to prove Jesus' prophecy about its destruction wrong.
He threw the entire weight of the Roman Empire into uprooting Christianity.
And yet history records that while his workers were trying to clear the foundations to rebuild the temple, fire erupted from the earth, terrifying the workers and halting the project completely.
Julian's reign was a massive, flashy show of power, but it had no root in the truth. One of the early church fathers, watching this imperial campaign against the church, simply remarked, "That little cloud will soon be gone."
And it was. Julian died in battle against the Persians after ruling for only a couple of years. The historical legend claims his final words were, "Thou hast conquered, O Galilean."
His massive efforts to crush the church withered away like grass on a hot roof.
Evil carries the seeds of its own dissolution. Every skeptical philosophy, every violent heresy, every political movement aimed at destroying the people of God comes onto the scene with immense sound and fury.
They look unstoppable, but they are poor, rootless things.
Verses 7 and 8 detail what happens, or rather what doesn't happen, when harvest time comes for this roof grass. The text says, "Wherewith the mower filleth not his hand, nor he that bindeth sheaves his bosom."
To understand the imagery, we look at ancient harvesting customs. Mowers would grasp the stalks of grain with one hand, cut them with a sickle, and sweep the harvested bundles into their bosoms or the folds of their outer garments.
To carry them away to the threshing floor.
Right.
But roof grass yields absolutely nothing to grass.
Nothing at all. It promises a harvest with its initial green blades, but it delivers ash. Evil, when all is said and done, proves to be a complete disappointment. It is a non-entity in the world.
When it dries up and blows away, the house is not impoverished. Nobody misses it.
No one mourns the loss of the roof grass.
And the final verse of the psalm points out that no one walking by says, "The blessing of the Lord be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord."
This refers to the cultural greeting used during a prosperous harvest. We see this beautifully illustrated in the book of Ruth.
Oh, when Boaz greets his workers.
Yes, when Boaz goes out from Bethlehem to his workers in the field, he greets them by saying, "The Lord be with you," and they respond, "The Lord bless you." It was a societal norm to invoke God's blessing upon a fruitful, honest harvest.
But the psalmist is concluding that true believers cannot bless the ungodly in their pursuits. We cannot wish Godspeed to evil endeavors, no matter how prosperous they look for a brief moment.
Because to do so would compromise the name of the righteous Jehovah. You cannot attach God's holy blessing to unrighteous deeds. The wicked might flourish for a brief season, they might tear up the field, but they leave no trace of blessing behind. Their legacy is sterile.
As we bring all these massive theological concepts together, there is a historical event that functions as a stunning climax to everything we have discussed. It involves a group known as the Vaudois, or the Waldenses.
Oh, an incredible story.
Their story encapsulates the plowing, the cutting of the cords, and the withering of the roof grass perfectly.
The history of the Vaudois under the leadership of Henri Arnaud is one of the most breathtaking narratives of perseverance in church history. They were a group of early Protestant Christians living in the high alpine valleys of the Piedmont.
And they faced just intense, brutal persecution.
For centuries, from the surrounding state powers and the established state church, the Duke of Savoy launched military campaigns against them. They were massacred in their own villages, their lands were stolen, and the survivors were driven out of their homes into the freezing mountains.
It looked like the enemy had completely prevailed. The furrows on their backs were long and deep. They were forced into a bitter winter exile in Switzerland. The fields were empty, the churches were burned.
But they did not give up. After a period of exile, Henri Arnaud, who acted as both their pastor and their military commander, organized what became known as the Glorious Return.
Which was a perilous military campaign against overwhelming odds.
A small band of these exiled believers marched back over the treacherous, snow-covered Alps, fighting off massive enemy garrisons, determined to reclaim their homeland.
And against all human logic, they succeeded. They defeated the army sent against them. When they finally returned to their own valleys, when they stepped back into their own churches for the first time since their banishment, the historical accounts say the enthusiasm was irrepressible.
The accounts describe them chanting Psalm 74 to the literal clash of arms. And then Arnaud mounted the pulpit in the reclaimed church. He stood there holding a drawn sword in one hand and a Bible in the other.
That is an incredible visual. The tension of earthly reality and divine truth held together.
And the text he chose to preach from in that moment of restoration was Psalm 129. He declared in front of his battered, victorious congregation that he would not rest until the rightful settlements of his brethren were completely restored.
He recognized the massive reality of the text they had lived through.
The plowers had made long their furrows on the backs of the Vaudois. The persecution was horrific. But God, the righteous husbandman, had cut the cords of the wicked. The persecuting armies of the Duke had withered like grass on the housetops, but the church had survived the winter and returned.
What a staggering theological scope we have covered today. Let's synthesize this without losing the weight of the concepts. We have seen that affliction is guaranteed. The church has been persecuted from its youth, from the brickyards of Egypt to the Roman amphitheaters to the Alpine valleys.
But that affliction is entirely restrained by a sovereign God. The enemies are just oxen pulling a plow. They rage, they pull, but God holds the license. He uses the sharpest blades forged by wicked men to prepare the soil of the soul. He directs the furrow.
We also saw that evil, no matter how strong it appears in the moment, is flashy and rootless. It is grass on a dirt roof. It sprouts fast, looks impressive, but yields a barren harvest and blows away, leaving nothing of value behind.
It provides immense comfort to know that the Lord is righteous, and in his perfect timing, he steps into the field and cuts the cords, arresting the momentum of the oppressor.
Before we close, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over, building on that central agricultural theme. Think about the times in your own life where you have felt completely plowed over by harsh circumstances. The times where it felt like long furrows of pain, grief, or betrayal were being carved into your life, tearing up everything you thought was stable.
Those are difficult moments to process.
Very difficult. But what if those very wounds, the ones you begged God to prevent, the ones you prayed would avoid your field entirely, are the exclusive locations where the seeds of your greatest spiritual fruit can actually take root?
It is the violent breaking of the ground that allows the seed to bypass the hard surface and find the moisture it needs to grow.
So the next time the storm hits the lighthouse or the iron plow enters your field, you can rest in the knowledge of who is holding the goads. Thank you for walking through this material with us. We hope you carry these insights with you into your week, and we look forward to having you back for our next deep dive on reform thinking.